Okay, good morning. This is Erin Friday. I am president of Our Duty and on the board of GenSpect. And today we are speaking with Sophia. She is a mother of a daughter who got caught into the gender web and came out the other side unscathed. And so we're going to hear a little bit about how her daughter came about her transgender identity in the first place, and then how Sophia and her husband and family worked to return her daughter to be comfortable in her natal sex. So we're going to first start out with Sophia introducing herself and then telling us uh, how her daughter first started to learn about transgender identities in the first place and the trajectory of her getting the belief that she was born in the wrong body and at what age. So, Sophia, take it away.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you for having me on the podcast today. I'm just really happy to be part of these conversations. And if I could give even one family hope out there that you can pull your kid out of this nonsense, this mess, I hope that I can offer that to people. I am the parent of a 16-year-old daughter who has now desisted. She's been desisted for about a year now, formally. And yes, I'm very happy to share our story from when she fell into this mess and then everything that happened in order to save her.
So when we were talking offline, you explained that when your daughter was about 11, she she after being homeschooled, she went to a public school, and on the first day of school, something happened that started to pique your interest. So why don't you start there?
Yeah, it actually wasn't a public school, it was a private school. In fact, we were living in the UK at that time. We're no longer living in the UK, but it was one of the most expensive day schools in the UK. So we were paying a lot of money to have her have this world-class education. And we had homeschooled during the pandemic, and when when she got back to school the first day of her 6th grade year, this was the fall of 2021, she came home from school on the first day of school and said, Mom, we had to go around the classroom and everybody tell their pronouns. And she had no idea prior to that what any of that was. And she was very confused. What is this? Why do we have to tell our pronouns? And there were a couple of the kids that she knew prior to being homeschooled, prior to the pandemic, who were now identifying as something other than what she knew them as before, including at least one little girl who was still dressing like a girl but who was using he him pronouns. And so that was when we first this whole topic first started entering our awareness.
And you weren't super alarmed at that time, thinking that this is just a developmental stage that kids are now going through, similar to, our generation was goth, or we went through a whole different set of kind of crazy hairstyles and whatnot. And so then your daughter then, walk us through like how your daughter took on a different identity and what your reaction was to that.
That's right. My husband is a bit more conservative and I think was a bit more had a bit more trepidation about all of this, but we both initially were approaching this as a natural curiosity, and in at no point in the beginning of this coming up did it cross either of our minds that she would actually go down this road, because she was a girly girl her whole life. Always had wore dresses and was into fairies and princesses and the whole 9 yards. So it never occurred to us that she would actually get caught in this. We thought it was just natural curiosity, and also we didn't know to be concerned about this. We knew that the trans issue, the LGBTQ issue was becoming more prominent in the national conversation, but as a more liberally minded person, I went into this thinking yes, of course, our kids who are gender confused need support. Yes, of course, we need resources, and it's right to help these kids have a fully functional life and get the things that they need to thrive. So it wasn't really until this was in my home that I started becoming educated about what a really insidious and dangerous idea and problem this actually is, and the ways that our kids are actually being groomed and um, indoctrinated into these ways of thinking, really, by the schools. So a lot of this did come through the school and also from online, from, her being exposed to things on social media and apps and videos and whatnot that she found online. But I think it initially and most strongly came through her being at school, because it wasn't just that issue, but clearly you can see that from the first day of school that school was putting this in her awareness and encouraging those type of questions, encouraging those alternate identities. She also met a little girl about halfway through that year, her sixth grade year, who herself was identifying as bisexual, the little girl. And when she became friends with that little girl, she came home and said to us that she was now identifying as bisexual, and her and that little girl were girlfriends, that they were having a relationship, which it did concern us a bit, because at age 11 we felt that was quite young to have any kind of sexual identity, or boyfriend girlfriend, girlfriend relationship, or to know for sure that you are bisexual or gay or straight or anything else. But we still at the time were, we're not, it wasn't concerning enough to us at the time. We were still taking the approach of, well, this is a natural curiosity. And we thought once she goes through puberty and gets attracted to boys that this will all go away. And that was absolutely not the case. From that moment on, things just continued to spiral downwards, getting worse and worse. Towards the end of that sixth grade year, she had a sex ed class and came home from that class saying that not only was she bisexual, but now she was actually identifying herself as asexual, and that all the kids in her friend group, none of them were straight. They were all had alternate identities. I think it's maybe interesting to note that by the end of this, before we pulled her out of that school, she had a group of about 10 girlfriends, and 9 of them were no longer identifying as girls. So, yes, come to find out that this is contagious. Gender confusion is contagious, just like now we know that anorexia and suicidality, even, like, a lot of these mental health topics are social contagions.
Right, and this one's so insidious because it's actually started. It's created and perpetuated by schools and by other adults. So it's not even a quote unquote natural social contagion. It's pushed. So let's
Absolutely.
talk about that push that your daughter underwent. So she's now saying she's asexual, and tell us, at what point did she then come to you, or if you found out another way that she now was identifying as a boy?
Yeah, well, she didn't start out identifying just as a boy. She started out towards the end of sixth grade, and then coming into seventh grade, she started out saying that she was non-binary and was using the pronouns they them at school, which, by the way, the school never contacted us about any of this to say that, hey, your child is questioning their gender, or any of that. um, so I can't say that the school was deliberately keeping us in the dark, but they also were not leaning into having any kind of conversations that our child was having a huge mental health process that was happening at school. But luckily, we had a good enough relationship with her that she wasn't hiding that from us. She came home and was giving us the scripts that I now know that she were are basically just scripts that she learned online from, influencers online, about how to have these conversations with your parents, and was coming home telling us that she was no longer identifying as a girl, that she was non-binary, and questioning her sexuality, that she was not straight, and all of those kind of things. So she did actually come home telling us those things. That was how we very first found out that that she was questioning her gender.
And then how did you and your husband react to her, now morphing along the trans trajectory?
Yeah, so initially we still didn't know that we should be worried. We still for the very long while in the lead up to this, we still thought this was natural curiosity and that we could just take a wait and see approach. And we weren't in the affirmation camp ever from the beginning. We were not like, great, you're non-binary, let's throw a party and start telling all of our friends and announce it, which I have seen other kids from her friend group did have those type of family situations. We were not that extreme, but we just honestly thought if we didn't give it too much attention, that it would go away on its own naturally, that it would be like any other kind of teenage, curiosity, that she would try some things on and then, that they would fall away when she would realize that that's actually not her identity. So we weren't that worried about it. We were mildly concerned, but just kind of taking the tack of, okay, we're not going to encourage this. Equally, we're not really discouraging it. We're just not giving it energy.
Right. Okay. Um, and then you told me earlier about a situation. Well, actually, as she took on this now non-binary identity, did she change the way she dressed? Did she change her room? Um, what were the changes that were going on in her life then related to adopting this new identity?
Yeah, it was nothing super extreme or immediate, but she definitely stopped wearing the girly clothes that she loved to wear before, always wore dresses and skirts, and then wanted to then start wearing just baggy clothes. When I would take her shopping, she started wanting to shop in the men's department. She had long hair. She wanted to cut it all off very short and dye it green, and we didn't allow her to do those things. Although I've always kind of felt as a parent that changing your hair is one of the more acceptable ways to explore, your identity. But we were by that point getting a little suspicious and concerned, and so we didn't let her cut it as short as she wanted to. She did cut her hair pretty short, but not boy short like she wanted to. And she used to play with American Girl dolls quite a lot. She had a whole room full of dolls and doll paraphernalia, and she put all of that away, hid it away in the closet, and got very self-conscious that anyone would know that she had all of that kind of stuff. She didn't change her whole entire room, but she definitely started filling it with pride stuff, flags and other markers, symbols of the pride movement. She joined the pride club at school and got very involved with that. Really, a lot of her other interests kind of fell away during that time. Like she no longer wanted to read books or do things with the family or um, even her interest in art fell away, physical activity. She used to, do rock climbing and play tennis, and she didn't want to do any of those things anymore. Really, the only thing that she wanted to do was be involved with pride-centric activities.
Yeah, that's a story I hear often, the hyper fixation on everything related to identity,
Mm.
and losing all those kind of healthy activities that used to be a part of her life. Um, so how did you handle her wanting to buy clothing in the men's department?
I did not allow her to do that. I I did allow her to wear baggier clothes and, pants, baggy pants and things like that. But no, I put my foot down at shopping in the men's department. Yeah, and I feel like it's probably important to say too that my daughter doesn't have any other predisposing conditions. She is not autistic. She doesn't have ADD. She doesn't have any other. I know a lot of these kids have other factors that are going in. My husband and I are married still. There's no, there's not like a mandala of other things. This all came just from social and school.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the social in school and what school was doing to advance your daughter's confusion.
hmm Yeah, so the shit really hit the fan in the seventh grade. That year, quite a few things happened. That was the same year that we started hearing in the news a lot about the banned books, and I had seen a list of the banned books, and again, I was still in the more liberal mindset that we shouldn't be banning books and that, literature should be freely available to if and that if my kid is has the wherewithal to go seek out some information or find a book that she's old enough to also to read that. And so I was approaching the banned book controversy again, not really knowing that this how harmful or insidious this was, just kind of looking at what I saw online, which set a lot of the online stuff that you read says these are wonderful resources for our teens and kids who might be questioning their sexuality or questioning their gender. These are important resources to have in libraries in our schools. And so it wasn't until I had seen a list of the books, so I knew some of the titles. And I actually found one of those books in my daughter's backpack shortly after I had seen all of this publicly in the news. And I pulled the book out and started flipping through it. And I was absolutely beside myself at what I was reading in the pages of this book. It's a book called This Book is Gay. And fully half of that book is very explicit descriptions of gay and queer sex acts and how to find people online to explore sex things with and even how to hide those things from your parents. And it was not the case that my daughter just randomly found that book in the library out of a natural curiosity. That book was put into my daughter's hands by a teacher. And I was telling you before, I still to this day am not sure whether that teacher actually knew what was in the pages of that book or just knew what they say online or what the National Library people say that this is an important resource for our teenagers. But yeah, my daughter was doing a project and the teacher handed her that book directly and said, "This will be a good resource for you." So that was, I think, the first moment when, again, like I said, the shit started to hit the fan for us with this whole thing because I just absolutely could not believe that my daughter, my baby, my at the time still 11-year-old daughter was reading in the pages of a book that was given to her at school, a place where I was trusting that she was being kept safe.
Yeah, it's actually really mind blowing. I have a copy of that book on my bookshelf, and I read it aloud a lot of the times and show it to legislators, and I've even shown it to judges, so that they can see what we say when we say our children are being groomed at school. We don't use those terms lightly. But when there's a book available, not only just available, but foisted on your daughter, that is teaching her how to find a random stranger to engage in sex acts, and it should scare every parent around, whether you're extremely liberal or not. Um, so you find this book. I understand that you took this book from your daughter, and then what did that lead you and your husband to do? Were the red flags just right in your face? And what did you discover? And what did you do to kind of see what else your daughter had been exposed to?
Yeah, so that made us concerned. We did start looking through her phone and her iPad, and just by sheer luck, I think she wasn't able to wipe the history on her browser, and we found a whole trove of pornography that she was getting into online that I don't think that she went looking for herself, but I think probably came into her awareness from friends and peers. And then once she found out that those things existed, the natural curiosity of anyone would be to go, what is this? And so, we found that she was looking at and reading a lot of pornography from lots of different places on the internet. We didn't know up until that point that Spotify is full of pornography. We thought Spotify was just music and one of the safer apps that she would be able to be on. Sure, there's explicit lyrics, but there is actual red pornography and
Mhm.
all kinds of really disgusting things that you would not want your 11 or 12-year-old child to be listening to on Spotify. And we also found another website related to anime where there was a lot of written pornography, and that was the moment when my mother heart just absolutely broke, because reading and looking at the things that my precious daughter was reading as her first foray into what sexuality is was devastating to me as a mother, and really started to, for the first moment, make sense why she was saying that she was asexual. Because if that had been my first inkling of what it meant to have sex, I also wouldn't want to have anything to do with it. So that was when we first started to get very, very concerned that something needed to happen, that we needed to intervene in some way. And at the same time as that, we also went to the administration of the school with this book. So I actually excerpted um, a bunch of passages, like the most egregious passages that I found in the book. I put them into a document and printed it out, and I sent it to the headmistress of the school, the middle school principal, the teacher, the guidance counselor, and just asked them point blank, is this what you consider the educational material for the best and brightest of the next generation? Is this what you consider to be suitable? And we even scheduled a meeting with the middle school principal, and he completely lawyered up. I printed out that document. I brought it with me. I put it in front of him and asked him to read as a parent himself and to tell me if he was okay with that as educational material as a parent, not only as a school administrator and a teacher, but as a parent. And he refused to look at the document. He refused to open it, which I'm sure the lawyers probably told him, don't comment on this specifically. I have a background where I've had to do political things and write talking points and things like that. And I could just hear the talking points in what he was saying. Like, it was almost like he was giving us a script that, and we were not the only family that was concerned about that. So the school got enough pressure around that time to actually pull the books from the bookshelves in the library and launch what I now think was a sham investigation, but they purportedly uh, got a committee together to do an investigation of these books and whether they were appropriate literature for the school library, which, by the way, did not include any parents. It only included teachers and administrators. And I can fast forward to the end of that story, which was on the very last day of school, kind of at the point when you couldn't really do anything else about it. They sent an email announcing that their committee had found that the books were appropriate and that they were putting them back on the shelves in the school library. And not only that, they were putting stickers on them so that now the children can actually find them even more easily, because they'll know that the banned books or books that are deemed for older children would have these stickers on them. And I feel like it's maybe important to say too that that school was K through 12. And so these books were really not only accessible to teenagers, high schoolers, but actually accessible to anyone, any of the children who would go in that library. I could see an argument for, maybe if you're 16, 17, 18, that there might be some argument that you could have access to books like this, but definitely not at age 11 or, younger than that. And those books are freely available and accessible. That was even one of the suggestions that we put forward, like put these books in a restricted section,
Yeah.
and they refused to do that as well. So.
None of this is surprising to me at all. Living in California, we could get these books out of our K through fifth grade. Um, it's and when we again talk about grooming, it's grooming. It's to teach these children um, at young ages about sex acts to make it um, easier for them to participate. And it's really quite horrifying. And the carve out of the parents from any of these discussions is emblematic too of this whole movement. And I'm sure we're going to dig into it where there are third parties that create the chasm between the parent and the child. It sounds like you and your husband uh, really took pains to have a close relationship with your daughter, and you did. Having the fact that your daughter came to you with all of these issues is really a sign of that close relationship that you had. So I want to kind of get into maybe how if that chasm ever was created between your relationship with your daughter and what it used to be, and also, and sorry, I'm layering a lot of questions in here, but what her mental health was like as she went farther down the rabbit hole, being exposed to this horrific pornography. And I know exactly what you're talking about because I had the same experience with my daughter, and I almost fell out of my chair watching what she had watched. But how did your daughter, how did her mental health uh, react to what she was being exposed to? And was there a time period where she started to move away from your husband and you because of, your desire to keep her safe?
Hmm. Yeah. I want to just take a tiny tangent before I get into the mental health to say that she's now in a Catholic school. And when we first put her in there, my husband and I both, they require all parents to do a training, as you would. The Catholic school, at least in our area, is very forward leaning on preventing all of the abuses and scandals that happened in the Catholic faith with, priests and abuse, pedophilia, and all of that. So they are really forward leaning. So we had to do this training, and as part of that training, we had to learn the signs that a child was being groomed or being sexualized. And literally all of the signs that they say that a child would display if they're being sexually groomed or sexually assaulted were what we experienced with my daughter. And it wasn't until then, and kind of looking back at this whole thing, when really one of the ways that I make sense of it now is that she was kind of being traumatized. Not kind of, she was being groomed and traumatized, and a lot of the mental health behaviors that we were seeing were a natural reaction to that. So her mental health was spiraling downwards during this whole entire couple year period. And that's the thing. If I had seen that this gender confusion and gender identification was supporting my daughter to feel better and to feel more like herself, that would have been a different conversation in our house. But what we observed in her was that she was becoming worse and worse as time went on, even to the point where she started self-harming. She was cutting herself, and we even found a suicide letter. And that was when, the suicide letter and the self-harm was the moment when my husband and I said, we have to do something about this. We can no longer wait and see. We have to intervene, and we have to intervene in a big way. And we had already started educating ourselves a little bit on this topic, on, the transgender, and we had found the term ROGD, and I had heard you on a podcast that you had pulled your daughter out of this. And a lot of people were telling us from a lot of different angles, you really need to be very proactive with this. You cannot just wait and see. This is like very dangerous, and you have a real chance to actually lose your daughter to this movement. And I think even still, we didn't want to hear those things. Like, it was very hard pill to swallow that we were going to have to intervene in such a drastic way. So yeah, I want to pause there just for a minute and see if you have any more questions about those bits.
Yeah, so sometimes it does take something really kind of in your face to realize, look, this is serious, and my daughter's going to be harmed. So at the point that she started to self-harm and have some suicidal ideation, were you and your husband aware of the medical pathway of where transgenderism leads?
We had only just started becoming aware at that point, and we were having some conversations with her where she was saying that she wasn't interested in medicalization, that she only wanted to change her pronouns and only wanted to identify herself as, first it was non-binary, and then she was playing around with, I'm a boy, I'm not a girl.
Mm.
You had also asked earlier how our relationship with her was, and during that time, our relationship with her also really, really suffered, and she really started blocking us out from, we did still have some conversations with her, but they were very scripted conversations really from her side. It was really her parroting scripts that she had heard, and they weren't real conversations with our daughter. And I at times even felt like she was possessed. Like, she would say things that didn't sound like her at all. She would say things like, "You don't have a daughter. You never had a daughter." And she would try to rewrite history and say, it wasn't that way. I didn't wear dresses all the time. I wasn't into princesses. None of that was, you're not remembering it right.
Yeah, that's a, I talk about the transgender movement as very cultish. Um, I think it is a cult without really a supreme leader. I think the supreme leader is self, but these kids do rewrite their history, and it was sometimes very hard to recognize the person standing before me as my daughter, the person I had raised, because the things coming out of her mouth I'd never heard before, including some, vicious statements towards my husband and I as parents, which was very unlike her as a younger version of herself. I mean, the language and the anger towards us. I don't know if you and your husband felt that too, uh, but there seemed to be a big shift. Suddenly I wasn't mom. In fact, my daughter started calling me by my first name, and that was a way to distance us. Did your family go through any of that kind of, breakup between the relationship of parent and daughter?
Not to that extent, but it did get quite vicious at times where I would just be in tears at the things that she was saying to me. It was heartbreaking. And, for anyone listening to this, if you're going through that as well, it's heartbreaking to
Yeah.
feel it go almost overnight from a close relationship. My daughter and I were so close throughout, and I attachment parented. We had such a close relationship, and our connection was really central for me, to suddenly, almost overnight, her, you know, being very vicious towards us in the things that she was saying, and almost like we didn't even know her. We felt like she had been, like I said, possessed.
Yeah. So then let's talk about what you and your husband did to start pulling her back, bringing her back into biological reality, um, and what tips, what things that you did, and what things that you wished you would have done, and things that you did that may not have landed and may have actually gone the other way. So a lot,
Yeah.
lot there, but what parents really want to hear is what were some of the concrete actions that parents have taken to help return
hmm
their child?
hmm Yeah, so it was the summer between her seventh and eighth grade year when we really felt like we needed to intervene, but we weren't sure exactly how and what to do. I had found Our Duty, and I had a call with somebody from Our Duty, and he said to me, smash her phone with a hammer. Get her off the phone, which was one of the first interventions that people suggested to us was get her off the phone and the internet. And we didn't want to hear that. I hate to say this, but we had really come to rely on the devices as a parenting crutch. We're busy people, and the devices carried us through the pandemic, and the kids were, for all intents and purposes, addicted to them. And we ourselves are addicted to our devices as adults too. And so hearing that we have to get rid of that was like, it was a pill we did not want to swallow. But we had first started by just locking down her devices as much as we possibly could. She got out of that immediately. Like the next day, all of the restrictions were gone. I don't know how they figure out they're much smarter than us in some ways digitally, but that never worked. She got around the restrictions several times. So there, with an iPad and an iPhone, there is no way. So if you, I want to really directly speak to parents out there, if you think your child's devices are locked down, think again.
Okay.
They can get around them. They can get around those parental restrictions. The iPhone makes it very easy for children to get around any parental restrictions. So that was our first step, was we thought we would lock down the devices, but also the school that she was at had her on the internet on for everything. And the school internet was not restricted at all. So no matter what we did with her phone and devices, she was able to go to school and get access to any and everything. And not only that, the school was showing her. She would go to Pride Club and the administrators were showing them videos about trans kids and what to say and how to talk to your parents and all of that stuff. So it started to become clear in the beginning of her eighth grade year that that was not going to be the end of the solution. We would need to actually get her off of the internet and get her out of the school that she was in. And we considered several options. We considered homeschooling. We considered switching her into a different school. Like I said before, we were in the UK, and the UK maybe more captured even than parts of America. So there's just nowhere to run and hide when it comes in the UK. So it started to become clear that we were going to have to move. We were going to have to actually pick up and move. And again, that was not something that we wanted to do. We did not want to uproot our entire lives. But it was that was around the time when she started self-harming. And so it became not anymore a question of like, would we, should we, but we must. We must. And we had also found Gabby Clark.
Mm-hmm.
She has a lot of resources for parents, and she is also very, very intense and forward leaning in terms of like you have to intervene in a big way, and don't think that you can just kind of tiptoe around this and that it's all just going to go away, because it's not. And so we started in the fall to really get our heads around the idea that we were going to have to move. We did it in a very strategic and calculated way. We planned that Gabby said, get her out of that school immediately, like tomorrow. But we were honestly afraid she was going to run away.
Mm.
And we lived in a big urban environment, so that would have been possible. Here we live in the suburbs. She could walk for an hour and still barely be at the 7-Eleven. So here it's like, where are you going to go? But in an urban environment, she could walk out the door and be, gone. And we lived very close to the school, so we knew that there were like what they call rainbow families who were affirming, who she could go to, who would take her in. So we were balancing a lot of delicate things at the time. A lot of, we were really wanted to handle it in the best, like most sensitive way to protect her. And so we planned. We knew we were going to move. We planned that when we pulled her out of school, and we ended before the end of the semester, so we pulled her out in the middle of the semester, that she was not going to go back to school that semester, but we were going to bring her back to the US and get both of our kids off, because we have two children, both of them off of the devices entirely, and we were going to go to family and just immerse them in family. That was our plan. And we kind of talked about this to the kids a little bit, that hey, this is coming, we're all going to detox from devices and whatnot. It did not make it any easier. In fact, when all that went down, I would say that it got worse temporarily, because both of our children were like addicts, and it was like withdrawing them from a drug, literally. And they literally reverted back to like they were toddlers. They did not know how to entertain themselves or how to be with themselves in any productive way. So we knew this going in, that it was going to require us as a family to really step up in a big way, in a very different way, to intervene as parents. We had also read the book by Gabor Mate, Hold On to Your Kids, which really talks about how, how keep your kids close, and they don't need to be socialized. In fact, they just need parental connection and relationships. So we really took all of that to heart. We took away the phones, we took away the iPads, we took away the internet. We did not even watch TV or shows. And we did that for 3 months. So
Wow.
it was a rip the band-aid off, and then 3 months of complete detox and complete heavy parental involvement, to play games every night as a family, to do activities together, for us to actually be off of our phones a lot more than we were comfortable and used to doing. We were lucky to have the support of extended family. So it was not just my husband and I, but we went to be closer. One of the reasons we moved back to the US, not only to be in a more conservative area, but also just to be closer to family, was to have that influence of the extended family. And, people who love her reflecting a different version of her back to herself than the one that she had been reflected from peers and school.
Yeah, that's really important. If you're lucky enough to have it, I know some parents don't. They have their extended families actually affirming their child. I was like you, very lucky to have extended family who would not affirm her, and we did this same thing using the aunts and uncles who knew her since she was little, and so she couldn't really snow them with the rewrite of the her fake childhood, and the phone. I mean, that's the phone and the iPad. I mean, I salute you on that. That's really really hard. And they are addicts. We are all addicts, and that withdrawal period is like a drug addict for all of us. The first couple of weeks that you don't have access to it. And I don't know if your children ever said this to you, but I know my son actually thanked me and said, I'm not going back on TikTok and Instagram. I'm not using that anymore.
They
Um,
have thanked us now.
yeah.
Yes. She now has a phone. It's a True phone, which is, a child safe phone that where she's only allowed access to the apps that we allow her to put on there. So if parents are looking for an alternative to an iPhone, I can recommend that. I know there's a lot of different options now that didn't exist a few years ago,
Yeah.
but we've been happy with True. And she has said to us that she looks around at her peers and she can see how addicted they are, and how much it costs them in terms of their ability to think creatively and think outside the box and have a personality. And she has thanked us now in hindsight, but when we first got rid of it, she lashed out so intensely.
Yeah, yeah, that was our experience, and I also think that there was almost a porn addiction too, tied to the internet addiction too. That was kind of part of it, that endorphin rush. Um,
Hmm. And I
uh,
want to be really clear too, that I do not think we could have had such such success with pulling my daughter out of this if we had not intervened in such a drastic way, if we had not completely gotten her off of the internet, off of her phone, if we had still let like little bits and pieces of that coming in, if we had not pulled her out of the school that she was in and completely separated her from that social group, that social environment, and all those influences, I, I, for anyone listening to this, if you have the ability and the wherewithal to take drastic action, don't hold back to do those things because you have such a small window of opportunity where you can really, especially if your child is in the 11, 12 age bracket, where they are still very much a child. I like to say that what we did was we basically just told her, no, no, you're not doing that.
Right, which is a hard thing to do in our generation. We were raised to child-led nonsense, and these children are also taught that they know better than their parents. But the boundaries that we set for them are a must. And you're not the first parent that I've talked to who got up and moved. And although it sounds like a monumental task, it is. But why are we here on this earth in the first place? Our children's needs come first. And we know what the end result is. Not that necessarily everything's always going to work out the way you want it to. But I have yet to hear from parents that took a more mild track and have been able to pull their children out. Not to
Yes.
say that it doesn't happen, but I have your podcast number 6 at this point, and I have yet to hear that.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
I
it's
think
very, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think we did have a child-led approach in early childhood, and I think that works quite well with very young children. But that was another thing. We had to really change our parenting style to more authoritative. I don't want to say authoritarian because that's just not my personality, but I had to become much more authoritative in myself, which was uncomfortable. It was
Mhm.
uncomfortable for me to adopt that kind of like I'm making the rules, I'm the parent, and because I was not accustomed to parenting that way, nor did I really want to. I wanted this utopia of child parent connection above all else. And that is just not the reality that we're living in today.
Yeah, we all want to go back and forth on that. You want to be friends with your kid, but I don't actually think, in hindsight, that I'm supposed to be my child's friend during their teenage years. I'm supposed to love them and have a relationship with them, but the friendship comes later because over those tumultuous years, they really need somebody setting boundaries, because that's their job at that age, is really to push on them. How far can I push? And if you don't have any walls set up, that's where the child can go, I think, sideways very, very, very quickly, because we want our kids to like us. And
Hmm.
sometimes it's okay for our children not to like us.
Yes,
And
I had to develop in myself a tolerance for my daughter being mad at me and not liking me and saying horrible things to me. I had to be able to tolerate that.
yeah,
And we do so out of love.
right.
That's what gives you the strength and the fuel to tolerate being the bad guy, being the villain in your child's life temporarily.
Yeah, it's very hard, especially when that wasn't that wasn't the normal in your household. Um,
Hmm.
so wow, you did some really amazing things. You took the phone, the internet, you moved. What else was going on that helped you uh, teach your daughter to love her natural body and love herself? Were there conversations?
Hmm.
Did she ever? I mean, she never said that she wanted to medicalize, so I'm suspecting that you didn't have to go through the kind of all the physical harms related to testosterone and what would happen to her. But what was going on during that period, that the conversations that you had with your daughter, and
Yeah.
the words that you used?
I'm glad that we never affirmed. So that is one thing.
Mhm.
Um, my daughter, she said that she wasn't interested in medicalization, but I firmly believe that if she had continued down the path that she was on, that she would have medicalized. One of the things that we found when we were going through her phone and we found all the pornography was that she had been meeting online with a counselor that I'm sure that the school or somebody at school told her, hey, you can go talk to a counselor online for free. And that was around the same time when we found out that kids can get hormones for free online without their parents knowing about it. So we were very afraid. Even though she said, I'm not interested in medicalization, we were terrified that she would do that behind our backs because we know that she had a binder. So she was wearing a binder for a while, which she had gotten from another kid at school. A child at school ordered it online and gave it to her. So she was willing to do that. And
Right.
I think it's just a slippery slope until they, are on hormones. Um, so we took the binder away. That was a very dramatic moment. And the school situation was a really important factor for us because I want to be clear. We moved country, so
Yeah.
we didn't just move to another state. We literally made an international move, which was it was traumatic for all of us to uproot our lives and to do so in a very what was really fast, because we didn't have time to mess around. I felt we we made the decision and within a month we were gone. Our stuff was packed and we were gone. We didn't want to let her finish out the school year. We didn't want any more time for her being exposed to all of this and have these opportunities to potentially do permanent harm that would become irreversible. So we landed on moving to a conservative area in Texas. And we really went around and around like, should we homeschool? Should we, what kind of school should we put her in? Is it conservative enough that she can go to the public schools? And we really took that decision very seriously. We even went as far as to contact the librarians and administrators of the public schools in this area, which is one of the most conservative areas in the country. And even still, one of our criteria for the schools was, do they have those titles of the banned books in their library? And all of them do. All of them in this area that we live in have those titles. And of all of the public schools in this area, we only got one administrator on the phone and they pussyfooted around the topic because we just very diplomatically wanted to ask, you know, how are you handling this issue with, potentially when students and family differ on this topic of gender? What is your approach? What's in your curriculum around these topics? We didn't get any response other than one who gave us again some talking points and was kind of, wouldn't come out and say one thing or the other, but it was very obscure, very difficult to get information. So we pretty quickly rolled out the public schools, and then even the idea of homeschooling, when we started looking into homeschool co-ops, many of those are captured, and you can't find that out directly necessarily. In some cases you can, but we started just finding buzzwords and things that would tip us off that there was, this type of ideology was very present. So we kind of quickly also ruled out homeschooling because we really didn't find homeschooling opportunities. Did you want
Sophia,
to
I'm
say
gonna
something?
I'm gonna back you up a little bit. So what were the buzzwords that you were stumbling upon with the homeschooling that raised your
Yeah, things like inclusivity or even individuality, like we celebrate the child's individuality, things like that.
Mhm.
Um, you can kind of see some of their marketing materials, their pictures and promotional materials. You could kind of get a feeling once you know what the queer um, culture, like
It-
what some of their signifiers are. You can kind of see some of those, and you can go on Google Maps and there's a setting where you can see if they have a pride designation, which they have to opt into. So we also looked at that on Google Maps. If they, some of them have openly have a pride designator as a pride safe or safe space. Safe space is another one, another
Mhm.
buzzword. We're a safe space.
Yeah, it's really sad to me that pride has turned into trans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's been
Yeah.
just completely co-opted. Okay, so homeschool's out, public school's out, and for listeners, yes, you are absolutely correct. All of it doesn't matter how conservative of a neighborhood you're in. It really matters whether the librarian is conservative and the school district is, which I would venture to say 99% are not. Um, so so then you end up at a Catholic school.
Yes, we considered other Christian schools, but many of the Christian schools are captured as well.
Right.
So we actually had to go in and read the policies, like the school's handbook and policies, to see how they were handling these type of issues, pronouns, gender identification, and the only schools that we found that were holding the line on there are two genders were Catholic schools. And we are Catholic. My husband is very Catholic. I'm less Catholic. I had always been opposed actually to a Catholic education for my kids. I wanted a secular education. So it again was a hard pill to swallow. But in the end, what we decided was that actually being in a peer group that again was going to reflect and mirror different values back to my daughter would be actually an important part of her coming out of this, would be to have friends and peer and not be just isolated at home with mom and dad, but actually to have other kids who were, let's say, quote unquote, more like traditional values, not kids that, and I know there's probably still kids at her school who have some leanings in one direction or the other, but yes, that's how we ended up at a Catholic school. And she has since also thanked us for putting her in a Catholic school. So
Wow.
we've really come full circle on the things.
Yeah,
But
so we're coming up to the end of our time, and so when your daughter came out of this, was there a sign that she was starting to move out of this, and what was that sign? And then when did you know that you were in now the safe zone?
mm, yeah, it was pretty immediate once the internet and the friend group went away. She was performing an identity, and when she didn't have the role models to perform it anymore, it fell away pretty quickly. It was a while, like probably another year before she verbally said to us, I am not trans, I am a girl. For a while she was still saying nothing has changed, but outwardly she was behaving more or less normally again and dressing normally and having a normal relationship with us and all the things. So, yeah.
When she started at the Catholic school then in Texas, um, do you know whether she was telling her peer group there that she was trans?
We actually had conversations with her prior to that and told her that's not going to fly and like you're going to be ostracized if you talk about those things. So you better just keep that to yourself, you know. We also told her this is your option to be in school, and if they kick you out of this school, you'll be do school at home with mom. And she really didn't want to do that. She really wanted to be with friends. So I think she was very also willing to go along with because we told her this is your one and only chance to be in school. So don't mess it up by going around telling everyone, you know. And I think she quickly, once she got into the culture and realized that no one else was doing that,
Mm,
it, she wasn't interested in being publicly, you know,
right.
she wasn't doing it to be weird. She was doing it to go along with the kids, and because all the kids were trans and queer, that's what she wanted to do. And when the kids were not doing that, then it was not difficult to get her to not do that anymore.
That's great. That's great. Well, for listeners out there, Catholic schools are not always the answer. The Catholic school that my daughter went to adopted her trans identity, and wouldn't listen to my directives not to do that. So it really depends on what state you're in and what Catholic school it is, because they are not all the same, unfortunately.
That's
Um,
true. You can consult the Newman Guide. The Newman Guide is a guide of Catholic schools that follow the very stricter doctrine of the church. So if a school, and they have a guide that has both high schools and universities.
oh wow, I didn't know about that. I just know that the Jesuit schools are all in on the trans.
Yeah, the Jesuits are more liberal, but yeah,
Yep.
it's called the Newman Guide. You can consult that, and will have the schools in your area and whether they adhere to the traditional Catholic values or not.
Well, this has been so enlightening, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And I just want to end with my favorite part of most of these podcasts is where your daughter, you said that she's thanked you for uh, enrolling her in the Catholic school, and is there a realization of what um, that she got caught up in a social contagion? Does she recognize that, or is she still too young to realize what happened to her?
I think she doesn't fully realize what happened to her, but we have had conversations with her because now we're staring down the barrel of university, which we're very concerned about. You know, she was susceptible to this once, and the universities are all captured. And so we're really going into that. We've had some conversations with her that we're going to start watching a lot of videos from Gen Spect. And, you know, there's a lot more resources now than there were even a year or two ago where we can start educating her about why this is so dangerous and insidious and frightening and what the risks are and why the schools are captured and where this is all coming from. So that's our next horizon with this. We're not, you know, it's not we're done and it's all fine and well. Although she is thriving now, she is absolutely thriving. She's involved in 12 different clubs at school, and none of them are pride related. And she's, you know, babysitting, working, earning money, and just all the rest. So, but yeah, that's our next horizon is to really start putting it in context for her. What is happening in our collective? Why is this happening? What happened to her? And sort of inoculating her for the future because she's not going to be under our control forever. You know, we have at best a couple more years of influencing her directly, heavily. And so, yeah, we're now looking into that next phase of really, yeah, just making sure that that she's shored up to go out into the world and understand what is confronting her in this ideology and to that so she has a shield against it basically.
Well, that's a great way to end this, because my daughter's now 19, and I'm probably not going to sleep soundly until she's 25. I mean, she's out of it, but that brain doesn't mature really until 23 and 20 to 25. And so there is always a chance that they get influenced again. And all we can do as parents is really teach them some critical, thinking skills so that they can actually see that they're being manipulated. So, Sophia, thank you so much. I look forward to, checking in a year or two from now and seeing how your daughter's doing and seeing how your family's doing. And I thank you for all the parents who are listening to your great advice. And I appreciate your time today. Thank
No
you.
worries. Thank you.